notes written, but I've known Uncle Jim 72 years. So the old memories are easy, but the newer ones were a little harder to retain. He has 3 generations of nieces and nephews every day, so you can tell how much he's loved. Another aunt was just buried about an hour ago in Montana, but we're all here for Uncle Jim. Uncle Jim was 9.5 years old when I was born, and the two of us had some really good times together as soon as I was old enough to be let loose with him. The country was in depression when he was born, and he was the youngest of 7 kids. Grandma and Grandpa worked very hard. They'd had 3 years of wheat crops blown out during the Great Drought in eastern Montana, and so they decided they would gather up. I think they had 3 or 4 kids by then. They head to Seattle, and they stopped in Missoula to see Casey and Lydia Jones, who had stood up for the wedding, and they never left. So Uncle Jimmy was born in Missoula. So was I. Most of us were. They never took welfare. Uncle Jimmy was the youngest one of the family, so he and I were very close in age. And they all 7 of the kids had to go to the Presbyterian church and every Sunday. Grandma, even though she had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, she couldn't walk with him the last few years when Jimmy was old enough to walk. And then our great-grandma, Barnard, came to town and found out that they were her grandchildren, which were her favorites in this earth, were going to Presbyterian, and she immediately said they have to go to the First Christian Church of Missoula, and it was on the other side of town. So Mom said from then on, they're trucking clear across Missoula, Montana to go to church because of great-grandma. They did it faithfully until Uncle Glenn and Uncle Willie and Uncle Jim found out that they could make money by picking up golf balls at the country club across the street from their house. And then they also found out if they volunteered to be the ones to clean up the clubhouse on Sunday morning after a Saturday night dance, they made money and still didn't have to go to Sunday school. So that was a great thing for the boys. They made money and didn't have that walk. An early tale was told of the first time the older siblings, this I'm sure was way before Jimmy was even thought of, that there were big bunches of sand in that pretty green yard across the street. And gee, we went over there and they found some neat holes. Well, that sand poured really good into the holes. And even when my mother was 90 years old, she could remember the sight of the country club caretaker coming across screaming at those kids with a fork or rake in his hand because they had filled up all the golf balls. Never to go back and visit again. The biggest thrill of my life with Uncle Jim was always when I was about 3. He would put me on the crossbars of his bike and whiz down Higgins Avenue to his best buddy's folks' little grocery store. And he thought the faster he went, that I would get scared. Well, wrong. I'm a true Purdy. I love speed. And even at that age, I dearly loved it. He would always panic by the time we got there. As the youngest of 7 children, I've already said that he came into life when Grandma had already gone on to crutches. And so my mom was the oldest, and she sort of was the second mom to them. And so he was a very adventurous little guy. You know, I hear all you guys telling me you got all this advice from him. I don't remember ever getting advice from Uncle Jim. Tormenting me and teasing me and leading me, yes. Not advice. Maybe we were culprits together. Uncle Jim, I have never heard him say a bad word about anybody. He just had to see Uncle Jim. He's up and he's going and he's happy and he's Uncle Jim. What can I say? Never held a grudge against anybody. Forgave anything. He had a basement bedroom in Grandma and Grandpa's first house. And I was very little. The one time he took me down there scared me to death because it didn't have any windows, one little light bulb, and he and Uncle Willie had made balsam airplane models, and they were all hanging from this low ceiling. Well, I visited once, never went back there again, but that was his abode. Let's see, the pictures in the earlier years show that even though I've always remembered Uncle Jimmy as the best dresser in our family, then as a little boy he went around in his big overalls a lot. But he liked to dress, he was always happy, and most of our dads were were in work clothes. Uncle Jim, when we went to visit him, he was pretty dressed up. He was always a salesman, Sam. One of the stories that was told that when he was just big enough to go around with his little red wagon, he found some pieces of linoleum, and I don't know if he found them in Grandma and Grandpa's garage or where, but he goes down the street over to Grandma Paris's place, knocks on her door, and of course she wasn't known as Grandma Paris to him. She was the mother of one of his buddies. And he says, "Can I sell you a piece of linoleum to patch your floor?" And she said, "Well, I don't need any. My floor's fine." She said, "Oh, no." And he took her by the hand and led her into his buddy's bedroom, got her down on her knees and said, "See that hole under the floor?" Well, when Grandma found out about it, she was totally chagrined, and I don't think he got to go out for a while. Uncle Jim always had a job, or two, or three, or four, as all of my uncles did. I don't remember one of them not having something going here and there and everywhere. Always had a main job, but all these others. And he was a paper boy. He'd do yard work for people and errands, work in a little grocery store. And these were all mainly before he was 10 years old. Then when World War II was going and his brothers had all gone off to the service, Uncle Jimmy went to a bigger store. Grandma and Grandpa moved into Brooks Avenue, and he went up to the bigger grocery store on Higgins and became a box boy, bag boy. And he'd been working there 2 or 3 weeks, and Grandma started getting these calls from irate mothers saying, "Why is your boy here in town and my son's serving in the service? He should be out in the service." Well, Jimmy wasn't even 14 years old then, so he always was old for his age, and he acted old too as well. He never lacked confidence in anything, I don't think. On our way to Uncle Glenn's funeral, Jan and Uncle Jim and Pat and I and Sherry sailed over there, and on the way he started telling us a story that none of us had ever heard before. We were totally shocked, and dang, he forgot it when we asked him a few weeks ago. But as best as Pat and I can put it together, he and one of his little buddies decided they needed to go to California, and he wasn't 14 years old, did he say? I mean, to me, it was totally unbelievable, but like I say, he was older for his age. And so they got an old car. They got about halfway down there, broke down, and so they met a mechanic that let them do some odd jobs there, got it going, so they got on down to California, and then it completely gave away. And one of the men they met down there took pity on him, and he gave him $120, I think, for it. And Uncle Jim knew he had to get his buddy home. He didn't apparently care about getting himself home, but he had to get his buddy home. So these industrious little boys got on the train, like the hobos get on, you know, and they started back to Missoula. Well, they got up almost to Missoula, and they changed trains, and they got on, of course, back then they were all coal-fired steam engines. They got up behind the coal tender. By the time they got to Missoula, they were blacker than black, and they missed the Missoula jump-off. So they finally got off, but Jim said he knew he had to get his buddy cleaned up. I guess he found a water spout or something, or stream, got his buddy cleaned up and took him home. But I don't know, maybe it's because Grandma was in a wheelchair or something. I don't know how he got away with that. I wasn't that brave. Okay, we hadn't thought about why one of my girl cousins, Linda, is a truck driver, but Pat was talking to her long distance yesterday. And she said, "You know, Uncle Jimmy's the reason I'm driving a truck." And Pat said, "What do you mean?" And Pat's her sister. She says, "Well, you know, when he drove that big truck in Montana, I decided then I wanted to do what Uncle Jimmy was doing." So, trucking has been in the family a long time. It started with our great-grandfather doing horse transfers into Yellowstone. Our grandpa helped him on that. Our grandpa then became a really transfer truck driver in Missoula. And several of my cousins in the Hall family, and my cousin Linda, Gary does some traveling. So Uncle Jim has affected a lot of us in a lot of ways that we haven't thought about. He and his first wife, Eileen, were living with my parents for a little bit when Jimmy Dale was born, and I asked Mom what was wrong with my uncle. He was running back and forth to the bedroom and about 3 feet off the ground. Well, after Jimmy Dale was born, they moved into a big house on the west side of town. I'd go over and babysit for him. And still, even then, I could see him bounding up the stairs to the second floor, and that he always had such a good spirit. Then they moved over to a pretty little white